Now this is a really noisy old guitar. That hum you hear is a ground issue. The other, that howling you heard, is due to a microphonic pickup. That's a common problem on old guitars and vintage pickups. So in this video, we're going to dive into microphonics, what it is, how it occurs, and how to deal with it. I'm going to attempt to get this noise under control by dunking this pickup into some hot wax, a process known as pickup potting. I'm also going to add a missing ground wire to try to get that hum under control. There are no guarantees that any of this is going to work. We might get to the end and this thing is still really noisy. But what we have is basically an unplayable guitar, so we have nothing to lose. So stick around to the end and let's see if I can pull this off. This is a late 40s, early 50s Silvertone electric archtop. A lot of companies manufactured guitars like this, Tesco, Kay, Harmony, and branded them Silvertone for the Sears and Roebuck catalog. This particular one first appeared around 1948 and sold for $89.50. The really cool thing you may not know is this pickup would have actually been manufactured by Gibson. This is the P13 model. It's the predecessor to the Gibson P90 that we all know and love. They introduced the P90 in 1946, but they continued to supply the P13 to some of the more budget model guitars. This old guitar was handed down to a client of mine by his grandfather. It has spent a lot of time on my bench. The neck block was loose, the neck was loose in the block. These old guitars also have a problem where as you're working on one glue joint, others tend to come apart along the way. But I've got it all solid now, everything's shored up, but then I plugged it in and we heard that terrible noise. Let's start with the grounding issue. We know this metal cover of the pickup is grounded. And you may remember back at the beginning of the video when I heard that hum, if I touched this cover, it got quieter. That should also happen when I touch the strings. So we know that our strings aren't grounded. It's not something you need to worry about on a modern guitar. That ground is always there. But a lot of these old vintage guitars didn't have a string ground. We're gonna add it on this guitar and that should take care of a lot of that hum. The other problem we have here is a microphonic pickup. Now a microphonic pickup is one that vibrates with the resonance of the guitar to create a feedback loop with the amplifier. It's most common at high volumes with lots of gain and on hollow body guitars like this that resonate acoustically a lot. Let's take a look at all the little components that make up a pickup that can contribute to this problem. Inside of a pickup, you have thousands of turns of hair-thin wire. This is out of a vintage Fender pickup. This is Formvar wire. You also have things like base plates. That's an original old P90's base plate and an old P90 cover, similar to what we'd have on this metal cover here. I also have a collection of old sandcast magnets from P90s. You also have things like spacers, keeper bars. This is an old Gibson T-top bobbin. So that's all pretty cool stuff, but all of this can work against you. You get all these tiny little components in there and certain frequencies make them vibrate. And then they can all start vibrating together along with the movement of the top to create this feedback loop that we call microphonics. What do we do about it? Well, we want to introduce something liquid deep into the pickup that's then going to be solid in another state to dampen all of this vibration. Over the years, lots of different things have been used. Lacquer, epoxy, beeswax. Today we're going to use paraffin wax. It's cheap, easy to find, and it's flexible enough that you can heat it back up and undo it should you ever need to do a repair down the road. Okay, so let's get this pickup out of here. We're really lucky here because the positive and negative connection for the lead is right on the back of the pickup, and that's not always the case. Okay, our pickup is out and ready to be potted. Check this out. Hear that rattle? So that's what's causing our microphonic feedback. We've got some vibration going on in here, and this wax will hopefully shore all of that up. I have a mini crock pot here you can get just about anywhere. This one is 2 quarts. Make sure you get one with a temperature control. I have my wax. This is paraffin wax. Again, you can get this at the grocery store. It's cheap. It will come in bricks, 4 bricks to a pound. I put all of this into my crock pot on low. It took about an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes to become liquid. Then I switched it to warm to stabilize around 150 degrees. I like 150 degrees because it's pretty safe for the pickup. And we have to remember that wax is a petroleum product, so it is flammable. That's around 400 degrees, and we're gonna stay well south of that. But just in case, we're gonna keep a fire extinguisher handy. You would never wanna throw water on a fire like this. It'll only make it spread. Keep a thermometer around to keep an eye on the temperature. A small setup like this, the risk is pretty low. Okay, so let's get into this. The first thing I'm gonna do is take a DC resistance reading of this pickup, 6.83. I'm gonna make note of that. to get a baseline reading of this pickup. DC resistance goes up with temperature, so if we wanted to reinstall this pickup later today, this gives us a baseline to know that we're about back to where we started from. But this multimeter is also important because it's going to tell us right away whether or not we failed. If we pull this thing out of the wax bath and we get no reading at all, we know we've got other problems to deal with. I've got two different thermometers. I have a laser thermometer for checking parts. I don't like it for checking the wax itself though, because when I do that, what I'm actually checking is the bottom of the pot, which is oftentimes hotter than the wax itself. So for the wax, I use a meat thermometer. Just over 150, that's pretty good. The pickup itself, we're at like 73 degrees room temperature. So we have a gap between the temperature of the wax and the temperature of the pickup. What you find is if you stick a cold pickup in there, it's going to suck out all the heat from the wax. Watch, I'll show you. So if I take this wrench and I dunk it in there, immediately that wax turns white around the wrench. But if I heat the pickup first, that's going to lessen the amount of time it sits in the wax. It'll go faster, it'll be a little bit safer for the pickup. So use a hair dryer, not a heat gun. The heat gun gets way too hot and you'll damage your pickup, to get the pickup closer to the temperature of the wax bath. Okay, so now that we're warm, we're going to dunk this thing in the hot wax. What I'm looking for are little bubbles. That's air dislodging from the inside of this pickup. There are levels of potting. It may take 5 minutes or so for a light potting just to get wax in between the cover and the coils. But for something this bad, I really want to make sure that the wax penetrates deeply into the coils. That might take 10 or 15 minutes or more. I'll move this around. I'll tap it against the bottom gently to see if I can dislodge some more air from it. I'm not seeing a whole lot of bubbles here. Let's flip this thing around and see what happens. Oh, look at that. Look at all those bubbles. Okay, great. That's a very good sign. That means we are getting wax displacing the air that's between the cover and the coils. So we're getting some good penetration there. There's no hard or fast rules here. You just kind of have to use your best judgment, keep an eye on it, and hope that you're getting plenty of wax inside of there. Okay, we've been in here for about 10 or 12 minutes. I haven't seen any bubbles for a while. I feel pretty good about the amount of wax we've got in here. So what I'm going to do now is turn off my pot, pull the crock out, and I'm going to let this thing just kind of start to cool down on its own. If I pull this out while it's still hot and this wax is still liquid, most of it's just going to run right back out of the pickup. So let's let this sit for a little while and start to get a little bit congealed. When that happens, we'll pull it out, we'll clean off the soft wax, and we'll see if this was a success. Okay, moment of truth here. Let's see how we did. If there's no reading on this pickup, we're done. All right, 7.46. So we're higher than our original 6.83K because the pickup is still hot. DC resistance goes up with temperature. So we're going to let this thing cool overnight, but in the meantime, let's fix that missing ground. Okay, I figured out that this was a screw-in end pin. It wasn't a press fit. So I used some soft jaw pliers to back this out. And there's that. Let's pull it off and find out what we've got under here. And I can see some plugged holes back here. You can definitely see the shadow from a different tailpiece on here. So yeah, this had something else on it at one point. But what I don't see is a hole or an indentation from a ground wire that would have been sandwiched between these two. So that was never on here as far as I can tell. So I wanted to see if maybe I could use one of these existing holes to run my wire through. So I've taken this guitar string and I can see that these all bottom out in the neck block. So we're gonna have to add one. I'm gonna take my awl and I'm gonna mark a hole right here on the center line, and we're just gonna drill all the way through. All right, I'm gonna strip an inch or so of this wire off the back so that this can make contact with my tailpiece when I put this all back together. But I'm gonna leave the rest of this on here because this is gonna be a long run of wire and I don't want any bare wire shorting anything else out. Run this through my hole. We'll fold this over just like this, and then we'll remount the tailpiece right here. Okay, all right, so let's find the wire. Here it is here. Grab my multimeter. Let's just double check to make sure we're making contact with our tailpiece. Here we go. So once we connect this to the ground on the pickup with the original pickup wire, we'll now have a string ground. Okay, we're back. It's day 2. This pickup has had overnight to cool down and solidify. And check this out. None of that rattle we heard yesterday is present, so I'm really confident we've got this thing packed full of wax. It's even heavier and it feels more solid, so that's a very good thing. At this point, I'm going to wire the pickup lead back up. I'm going to hook up the ground wire we installed, put it back on the pick guard. We'll string it up and see how we did. This is great. I'm 100% satisfied with this. There's no howling or obnoxious squealing, none of that microphonic feedback we heard to begin with. Now, obviously, you still hear a little bit of hum there. That's all normal electronic interference that you're going to pick up on an old guitar with a single coil pickup and an amp that's in a studio full of lights that's turned up way too loud. The point of the string ground was so we could kind of get that a little bit under control. When I touch the strings, it does get better, and that's what I expected to happen. So not only have we brought this guitar back to life, but we've done it in such a way that respects the history and the vintage integrity of it. Had that not worked, I'd have to rip this pickup apart and rewind it to tighten up the coils, maybe fabricate some new parts for it. Worst case scenario, I would have had to experiment with some more modern pickups that might be better equipped to handle this kind of feedback. I'm so glad I didn't have to do any of that, and I know my customer's going to be happy as well. Hopefully you've learned a little bit about microphonics, pickup potting, and overcoming some of the challenges of working on a noisy old vintage guitar.